Let's just begin with this. I want you to just give yourself a grade, Mr. Mayor, of how you handled Katrina. What would you give yourself?
Well, that's tough to do, Brooke. I mean, it was a catastrophic event, the largest natural and man-made disaster ever. Basically, coming through that, I did some things that were well done, and I also made a few mistakes. I've talked about that a lot as far as whether I should have called the evacuation, the mandatory evacuation, a little bit earlier, but that's tough to do.
But if you had to, and I'm just putting you on the spot just because I can here, sir, A, B, C, D, or F, what would you pick?
Probably a C or C plus.
Now, there have been a lot of comparisons, and I know especially during that time, you and Rudy Giuliani and 9/11. But the big difference here is that, you weren't just the leader, the mayor of the city in crisis. You were also the victim. Many homes underwater, half your police department, their homes underwater. You had just the clothes off your back.
Yeah.
But the criticism is, as a leader, you didn't just stumble off the blocks, you fumbled the ball. Do you agree? And then how do you respond to that?
I don't necessarily agree. I don't think any mayor in our history has gone through what we have gone through. With all due respect to Mr. Giuliani, his disaster was confined to a very small area. This was a total devastation of almost an entire city with 80% of it underwater. The fumbles that people talk about are mainly people that weren't here. And that's what I try and do with the book. I take you behind the scenes so you can understand fully how complex and daunting this task was.
Well, staying with football analogy here and the fumble, a lot of people I know, and I've talked to folks in New Orleans since then, who say, why did he still hold that football game in the Superdome the Friday before the storm hit that Sunday night and a Monday morning? Do you regret making that call?
No, I don't. If you go back to when Katrina, she was a very deceptive storm. And it wasn't until the Friday night before she hit on a Sunday that there was real clarity that she was coming to New Orleans. I got a call from Max Mayfield, the head of the Hurricane Center, who said, man, look, in my professional opinion, this is headed for New Orleans. And that's when we moved to mandatory evacuation.
I want to bring in Chad Myers, weatherman here, who very much so was here during Katrina. Jump in, sir.
Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, this was a Category 5 24 hours before it hit your city. How did people not get out? How did they not get the word? And better yet, let's not Monday morning quarterback. When this happens again to a different city in America, how do we fix it so people really do leave?
Well, you say that it was a Category 5, and that's true. But she was dancing around, and she only got pointed toward New Orleans 24 hours out. It takes this region about 72 hours to effectively evacuate. Now, the issue of other cities, I'm really concerned about that. We're starting to see more natural disasters. As a matter of fact, I've been tracking them, and there's been over 400 declared major disasters since Hurricane Katrina. And they're getting more intense, and they're being linked, natural disaster with a man-made disaster. And nothing has really changed from the laws that govern our nation's response. So I'm really concerned.
Mayor, let's pick up with the federal government, because you talk a lot about FEMA. You talk a lot about the federal government here, very much so slow to respond. And you specifically talk about the President Bush speech. We all remember watching him, Jackson Square. You write about the valuable lights and the generators, and you write specifically that Disney-like magic left almost as quickly as it arrived. And your point here, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the White House was just very out of touch.
Well, out of touch and basically in a reactive mode. They were basically spinning. And that whole scene, in my humble opinion, was designed to tell the world that New Orleans was really back. But we weren't. There were no lights. There still was water in many parts of the city. And it just points to how out of touch, which is your word, but how the spin game started to come into play to try and give people around the world a different impression that wasn't real.
Like we said, it's a self-published book. You get very real. You talk about your feelings with regard to Governor Kathleen Blanco. You talk about a woman who used to work with you in your office who, you essentially sent to Baton Rouge maybe to get out of the way here. Are you concerned at all going forward, Mr. Nagin, that people may not want to work with you down the line?
Well, I don't think that. I mean, the main reason for my book is to give people an insider's perspective on what really happened.
But you agree that you were pretty harsh on some of these folks.
Actually happened. I don't know about the Katrina incident was harsh. I'm just relaying to the public what happened.
Let's talk about your sharp tongue. Some of what you said post-Katrina, the city of New Orleans was Chocolate City. The city was overrun by Mexican workers. Do you think, looking back here, 6 years later, do you think at all your emotions maybe drown out the message?
Well, that could be, but it was an emotional time. I mean, the Chocolate City speech was in response to some pretty bold calls to change the footprint of the city and change the social makeup of the city, and I rejected that. As far as the Mexican workers, that speech was totally turned around because I was talking about we needed workers to come in and we needed to get comfortable that they may not look exactly like us.
But you were leading the city. You were the mayor. I mean, looking back at some of those things you said, do you regret them?
I regret that they hurt some people, but some of the circumstances dictated that I make bold statements. To bust through the clutter, there was a lot of media attention, and it was, in my opinion, part of my responsibility to talk to the diaspora, and that's how I got the message out.
Quick yes or no. If Katrina were to happen again in New Orleans, would the city be ready?
Oh, I think the city is definitely ready. The hurricane protection system, there's a $14 billion system that has been built. Our evacuation systems have been tested. Right before I left office, we had a very successful evacuation where we did a mandatory and got everybody out once again.